Hey everyone, in today's video, I'll be talking about one of the most common triggers of Meniere's disease attacks. And today, this one isn't metabolic. It's not inflammation or sugar or foods or salt or any of that kind of stuff. This one is about head movement and physical activity. We're talking about a circuit problem. So if you have Meniere's disease and you're still having flare-ups, still having attacks of nausea, tinnitus, vertigo, then you're going to find today's video very helpful because I'm going to explain why head movements and physical activity, why that causes a flare-up, but also what it means really and what to do about it. So let's get into it. So when we're talking about head movements and physical activity triggering Meniere's disease attack, to understand why that's happening, you got to understand that the longer you have Meniere's disease, the more your balance stability pyramid is going to become uncalibrated. Now, I'll show you a picture of that. The balance stability pyramid is kind of a basic way that I used to explain this to people. So you can see we have a three-dimensional pyramid, right? And at the bottom of one of the corners, we have the information coming from your inner ear, right? Your vestibular system, your semicircular canals, and your otoliths. That's the part that Meniere's affects. And then we have, on the other corner, information coming from your eyes, your vision, right? Very important. And then the last corner is information coming from the joints and muscles, primarily in your upper neck. And on top of all that, we have this thing called the cerebellum. Now, in Meniere's disease, long term, what happens is the signals coming from the inner ear are decreased. Now, neurologically, that can create some problems because neurons need to be fired to stay alive and to be healthy. And Meniere's disease basically chokes that off. And so over time, you get dysfunction and literally sickness of the neurons in the pathways that carry the information from your inner ear into your brainstem where it can be processed. So what does that do? Well, what that does to the balance stability pyramid is, it means one of these other corners is going to have to turn up in order to make you functional. It's going to have to turn up its gain. So where does head movement and physical activity come in? Well, head movement and physical activity exacerbates the imbalance in that balance stability pyramid, right? So what happens is, as your Meniere's disease continues over time, you become less and less tolerant of different types of physical movement. For some people, it's turning to the left. For some people, it's turning to the right. That largely depends on what side your Meniere's disease is the worst. What's happening long term is that whole system that carries the pathway of the signals from your canals and otoliths and all that inner ear stuff, that pathway is going to decline in health. And so over time, unless that's treated, unless the system is recalibrated, okay, you're going to not be able to do certain movements that exceed your tolerance, right? Really what happens is there's an imbalance on the right and the left sides, or really it could be both sides, and you just move beyond your limit of tolerance, right? So I'll give you an example. I have a lot of patients that will say, well, you know, I was out mowing the lawn, or I was out gardening, and then later that day I had a flare-up. Well, what are you doing when you're out there? Well, you're moving around, you're looking, and that kind of, you know, shaking it up, that kind of shaking it up will exacerbate the imbalance that's in the system, right? Because we've got this balance stability pyramid, and the vestibular system corner is not doing well. And then when you go in and you do something that's really requiring that vestibular system to give signals so that it can be processed correctly, so that your brain knows where you are, it's not going to happen, right? You're going to get abnormal signals, a decrease of signals, and that imbalance is what's going to provoke the attack. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't also have all the metabolic stuff that we've talked about in these other videos, right? You could still have an immune system problem, a problem with sodium triggering it or salt, a problem with alcohol or caffeine or stress or fatigue. All of those can make that little balance in there in the stability pyramid very tenuous, right? Very kind of, kind of on the edge. And all it takes is going outside and looking quickly, and whew, now you've got an attack. So what it means is that if the head movements and physical activity flare you up, you're probably needing to have your system recalibrated. I remember one of the first Meniere's patients I had years ago was a World War II vet. And it's really long before I did any of this kind of metabolic, biochemical stuff. And he had a very, very strong imbalance between the right and left sides. But we were able to do the proper, I'm going to call it recalibration therapy, and then he was asymptomatic. That's what he needed. Now that was, a little bit of a home run, but that's very often what people need that have this kind of a trigger, right? So again, if physical activity and head movements seem to bring on your attacks, then you're probably a good candidate for the right type of vestibular recalibration therapy. Now, I'm going to say, I don't really mean like your garden variety vestibular rehab. There's a certain approach that I and other people like me that have the training that we use, where we're trying to make it very, very specific, and we're trying to identify things that are a little more complicated for us to talk about in this video. But I mentioned the cerebellum in this balance stability pyramid. A lot of times it's the cerebellum that's not allowing the system to recalibrate. Why? Because the cerebellum is a error checker, right? It makes everything you do smooth, accurate, and coordinated. If the cerebellum isn't working, then it can't adjust and reweight your system based on what's going on with your vestibular system, right? I've got another video on how the cerebellum causes dizziness. I think that you guys might find that helpful. So we talked about why that's happening. It's happening because your system is imbalanced and it's not recalibrated. What does it mean? Well, it means you probably are a good candidate for the right type of vestibular brain-based rehab. But what do you do about it? Well, remember, you still need to make sure that whoever you're working with understands about all those metabolic things that we talked about, right? All the other things in this series about weather changes and hormones and sugar and salt and alcohol. All those things can be at play. And yes, you could still have, and probably do have, some sort of immune system problem. It's just that those might not be 80% of the problem. What you might need to really take you the rest of the way, once those things are tested and cleared up, is the right type of rehab. So please make sure you're working with someone that knows all of that, right? Because it'll make your job and their job a lot easier if they do understand that. All right, so just to review, why would head movements and physical activity cause you to have a flare-up? Because it exacerbates the imbalance and the asymmetry in your vestibular system, and it's not recalibrated. What does that mean? It means that you probably need to have that system recalibrated, but before you jump in and do that, you got to make sure that someone looks at all those metabolic factors first, right? Okay, I hope you found that helpful, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.